What would you do if the sister you loved and trusted, the one you welcomed into your home, was secretly sleeping with your husband? Jane and Tony had a beautiful marriage, full of love, romance, and everything she ever dreamed of. But when Jane's younger sister, Amanda, moved into their home, things took a dark and unexpected turn. Amanda, young, beautiful, and dangerously seductive, set her eyes on her sister's husband. What started as harmless flirtation turned into a scandalous affair that would shake the entire family. But the moment Jane caught them red-handed, the real nightmare began. Would Jane fight for her marriage or walk away? And what shocking twist awaited them all in the end? Jane is a stunning 30-year-old beautiful woman with deep brown skin that glows like polished mahogany. Her tall, slender figure is graceful, and she carries herself with the quiet confidence of a woman who knows her worth. Her long, dark hair flows in soft waves down her back, always neatly styled. She has striking almond-shaped eyes that sparkle with warmth and intelligence, framed by naturally thick lashes. Her full lips are always coated with a subtle gloss, and her radiant smile has a way of lighting up any room. Jane has a timeless beauty, elegant, effortless, and natural. She doesn't need heavy makeup to stand out. Her charm lies in her simplicity. She dresses with class, preferring well-fitted gowns and stylish, modest outfits that accentuate her figure without revealing too much. She is the kind of woman who turns heads without even trying. Beyond her beauty, Jane is kind-hearted and deeply loving. She is the kind of woman who puts others before herself, always making sure the people around her are comfortable and happy. She loves deeply and is fiercely loyal, especially to her family. Having grown up in a humble home, she values respect and integrity above all else. Jane is also a hopeless romantic. She believes in love, trust, and the idea of soulmates. When she married Tony, she gave him her whole heart, certain that their love would stand the test of time. She enjoys planning romantic surprises for him, small gestures like preparing his favorite meals, leaving little love notes, or dressing up just to make him smile. However, despite her loving nature, Jane is not weak. She is smart, observant, and strong-willed when necessary. While she trusts easily, she also has a sharp intuition. If something feels off, she won't ignore it for long. She believes in communication and always tries to resolve conflicts with maturity and understanding. But like every human, she has her flaws. Jane is sometimes too trusting, especially when it comes to family. She believes in giving people the benefit of the doubt, even when they don't deserve it. Her heart is so big that she often overlooks warning signs, choosing to see the good in people rather than their flaws. This is why she never suspected Amanda's intentions, because in her mind, her little sister could never betray her. Jane is also a woman of dignity. She carries herself with grace, never raising her voice unnecessarily or engaging in petty fights. Even when hurt, she prefers to handle things privately, maintaining her composure at all times. She believes that a woman should always act with wisdom and self-respect, no matter the situation. For Jane, family is everything. She is the kind of sister who would sacrifice her happiness just to see Amanda smile. When their parents struggled to pay for Amanda's school fees, it was Jane who stepped in. She was more than just a big sister. She was a second mother, a protector, a guide. And this is why Amanda's betrayal would hurt her more than anything else. Jane's world revolves around her home, her marriage, and the simple joys of life. She loves cooking, decorating their mansion, and taking care of her husband. She enjoys hosting family dinners and spending quality time with the people she loves. She is the definition of a good wife, a woman who believes in building a happy, peaceful home. But what happens when that home is shattered? When the man she loves betrays her with the sister she adores? Jane will soon face the greatest test of her life, one that will challenge everything she has ever believed in. Will she fight for her marriage, or will she walk away with her dignity intact? Only time will tell. Tony was the kind of man who turned heads whenever he walked into a room. He was tall, with a well-built physique that made him look like a model straight out of a fashion magazine. His dark, smooth skin had a natural glow, and his neatly trimmed beard gave him a mature and sophisticated look. His deep brown eyes held a certain charm, the kind that made people feel at ease when they spoke to him. His smile, warm and confident, was one of his most attractive features, always drawing people in. Dressed in well-tailored suits for business meetings and casual designer outfits at home, Tony had a taste for the finer things in life. He carried himself with the kind of confidence that only came with success. As a wealthy businessman, he had built a strong reputation in the corporate world. His wealth was evident in everything he owned, from his expensive wristwatches to the luxury cars parked in his mansion. Despite his success, Tony was a man of charm and charisma. He knew how to make people feel special, and his way with words could make anyone smile. He was intelligent, well-spoken, and had a way of handling situations that made him appear in control at all times. His ability to stay calm under pressure was one of the reasons Jane fell in love with him. He was the perfect gentleman, polite, kind, and always knew the right thing to say. As a husband, Tony was loving and romantic. He never hesitated to spoil Jane with gifts, expensive vacations, and sweet gestures that kept their marriage exciting. He was the type to remember anniversaries, plan surprise dinners, and whisper sweet words into her ears just to make her blush. He loved Jane deeply, and anyone who saw them together could tell that they were madly in love. However, Tony had a weakness: temptation. As disciplined and self-controlled as he appeared to be, he struggled when faced with something he desired but knew he shouldn't have. He was the kind of man who always did the right thing, but once a dangerous temptation lingered long enough, his resolve would start to weaken. At first, he had been firm in resisting Amanda's advances. He loved his wife and knew that entertaining her sister's flirtations would be crossing a dangerous line. But over time, as Amanda continued to throw herself at him, dressing seductively and creating moments of tension, Tony started to struggle with his emotions. He told himself that he was just being friendly, that nothing serious would ever happen. But deep down, he knew that he was slowly being drawn into something he had no business entertaining. Tony's biggest flaw was his ability to justify his wrongdoings. When things finally crossed the line with Amanda, he convinced himself that it was just a mistake, that he could stop anytime he wanted. But the more time he spent with her, the harder it became to let go. She made him feel wanted in a way that was new and exciting. She was young, full of energy, and knew exactly how to make a man weak. Despite everything, Tony was not a bad man at heart. He was not cruel or intentionally hurtful. He never wanted to betray Jane, but he had allowed himself to fall into a temptation he couldn't resist. And by the time he realized how deep he had gone, it was already too late. He had fallen for Amanda, not just physically, but emotionally. His greatest fear was being exposed. He knew that if Jane ever found out, it would break her heart. And when that day finally came, when Jane caught them in the act, Tony felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: shame. For the first time in his life, he had no words, no excuse, no justification. The woman he had sworn to love and protect was standing in front of him, shattered by his betrayal. And at that moment, Tony realized that no amount of pleasure was worth losing the love and respect of the woman who had stood by his side through everything. Amanda was the kind of woman who turned heads wherever she went. At just 20 years old, she had a youthful glow, flawless brown skin, and curves that made her look effortlessly seductive. Her long, dark hair framed her delicate face, and her full lips always seemed to carry a teasing smile. She had a way of making people, especially men, feel drawn to her, even when she wasn't trying too hard. Her sense of style was bold, daring, and impossible to ignore. Amanda loved wearing clothes that hugged her body perfectly, showing off her tiny waist and curvy hips. She preferred short dresses that swayed when she walked, tops that revealed just enough to leave men wanting more, and high heels that made her legs look even longer. At home, she often wore silky nightgowns that clung to her figure, draping over her in a way that made her look both elegant and dangerously tempting. She loved jewelry, gold earrings, thin anklets, and bracelets that jingled softly when she moved. But Amanda's real power wasn't in how she looked. It was in how she carried herself. She knew the effect she had on men, and she used it to her advantage. She had a way of speaking in a soft, playful tone, making every conversation feel like a secret between her and whoever she was talking to. When she laughed, she would tilt her head back slightly, brushing her fingers through her hair as if she had just heard the most interesting thing in the world. Around men, Amanda was confident, playful, and a little bit mischievous. She loved attention and knew exactly how to get it without looking desperate. When she entered a room, she walked slowly, her hips swaying just enough to make sure people noticed. She maintained eye contact when she spoke, often letting her gaze linger for a second longer than necessary. If a man was talking, she would lean in slightly, nodding as if every word he said fascinated her. And when she touched someone, even if it was just a light brush on the arm, it always felt intentional. Amanda had mastered the art of making men feel important. She asked them questions about themselves, laughed at their jokes, even the ones that weren't funny, and acted like she admired them. She knew how to make a man feel like the strongest, smartest, and most desirable person in the room. And that was her secret. She made men feel special, and they couldn't help but want more of her. But beneath all the charm and confidence, Amanda was also calculating. She wasn't just flirting for fun. She liked knowing she had power over men. If she wanted something, she would find a way to get it, and she never backed down from a challenge. She wasn't the type to feel guilty about using her looks and charm to get what she wanted. In her mind, life was a game, and she was simply playing to win. When she moved into Jane and Tony's mansion, Amanda knew exactly what she was doing. At first, she pretended to be nothing more than an innocent younger sister, someone who looked up to Tony as a brother-in-law. But deep down, she had already set her sights on him. She admired how strong and confident he was, how he carried himself with power and authority. She noticed the way he dressed, the deep tone of his voice, and the way he laughed with her sister. And the more she watched him, the more she wanted him. She started small, stealing glances, giving him compliments, laughing a little too hard at his jokes. Then she became bolder, wearing outfits that showed off her body when she knew Jane wasn't looking. She found reasons to be alone with him, brushing past him in the hallway, pretending to need his help with small things. And when she saw that Tony was trying to resist, it only made her more determined. She loved the thrill of the chase, and she knew that sooner or later he would break. Amanda wasn't just a beautiful young woman. She was a woman who knew her power, and she wasn't afraid to use it, even if it meant betraying the one person who had always trusted her the most. Tony and Jane's mansion was a true symbol of wealth and luxury, standing tall in one of the most prestigious neighborhoods in Lagos. From the moment anyone approached the grand iron gates, they could feel the aura of power and success that surrounded the home. The gates, adorned with intricate gold designs, opened automatically, revealing a long, beautifully paved driveway, lined with tall palm trees that swayed gently in the breeze. The driveway led to a massive three-story mansion painted in a pristine shade of white, with large glass windows that reflected the bright African sun. The front entrance was nothing short of breathtaking, a towering wooden door with golden handles, flanked by two marble pillars that added to the regal feel of the mansion. As soon as one stepped inside, the sheer elegance of the interior was enough to leave anyone speechless. The grand foyer featured a sparkling chandelier, dripping with hundreds of crystals hanging from the high ceiling. The polished marble floors shone so brightly that one could almost see their reflection, and the walls were adorned with expensive artwork from renowned Nigerian and international artists. To the right of the entrance was a spacious living room, designed to impress any guest who walked in. The furniture was imported, made from the finest leather and velvet, with gold accents that added a touch of royalty. A massive flat-screen television covered an entire wall, and beneath it, an electric fireplace added both warmth and style. Expensive vases, sculptures, and decorative pieces were carefully placed around the room, each one telling a story of wealth and refined taste. Floor-to-ceiling glass windows provided a breathtaking view of the lush green garden and the large swimming pool in the backyard. The dining area, which was connected to the living room, was just as grand. A long glass-topped dining table sat in the center, surrounded by 12 high-backed chairs with luxurious cushions. Above it, another dazzling chandelier cast a warm glow over the space, making every meal feel like a royal feast. The kitchen, which was hidden from direct view, was equipped with the latest appliances, double-door refrigerators, an oven that could bake anything to perfection, and sleek countertops made of Italian marble. A grand staircase with a golden railing led to the upper floors, where the bedrooms were located. Jane and Tony's master bedroom was nothing short of a 5-star suite, The room was enormous, with a king-size bed draped in the finest silk sheets and a walk-in closet large enough to be its own apartment. The ensuite bathroom was a paradise of its own, featuring a jacuzzi, a glass-walled shower with gold fixtures, and a vanity mirror surrounded by soft, glowing lights. The mansion also had several guest rooms, each beautifully designed to provide maximum comfort. Amanda was given one of the most luxurious rooms when she moved in. It had a large, soft bed, a private balcony with a stunning view of the estate, and a bathroom that looked like it belonged in a palace. Outside, the mansion's beauty continued. A massive swimming pool sparkled under the sun, surrounded by elegant lounge chairs and shaded cabanas. A well-manicured garden stretched across the backyard, filled with exotic flowers and a fountain that added a touch of serenity. At night, the entire mansion lit up beautifully, with warm golden lights highlighting its stunning architecture. Every corner of the mansion spoke of wealth, elegance, and perfection. It was the kind of home most people could only dream of, and Jane had always felt incredibly lucky to live there. Little did she know that within these very walls, her perfect world would soon crumble. Before Amanda arrived, Jane felt like she was living in a dream. Her home was everything she had ever wanted, a beautiful, luxurious mansion that stood as a symbol of the love and success she shared with her husband, Tony. Every corner of the house held precious memories of their journey together. From the grand living room, where they spent evenings watching movies, to the elegant dining table where they shared romantic dinners, the mansion was not just a house, it was a home filled with warmth, laughter, and love. Jane adored her marriage. She had married the man of her dreams. Tony, a handsome, wealthy, and loving husband who treated her like a queen. From the moment they exchanged vows, Tony had been everything she hoped for in a partner. He showered her with love, attention, and expensive gifts. But more than that, he made her feel cherished. He would often hold her close, whisper sweet words into her ear, and remind her how lucky he was to have her. Their love was not just about material things. It was deep, passionate, and built on years of trust and understanding. Mornings in their home were always filled with joy. Jane would wake up to the smell of fresh coffee, and Tony would sometimes surprise her with breakfast in bed. They would laugh, talk, and plan their day together. Even after years of marriage, he still made her heart flutter. He would send her sweet text messages while she was at work, reminding her how much he missed her. At night, they would sit together, holding hands, reminiscing about their love story and dreaming about their future. Their intimacy was just as beautiful. Tony was attentive, gentle, and always eager to make Jane feel special. They shared a deep emotional and physical connection that made Jane believe their love was unshakable. She never doubted his loyalty, not even for a second. Jane felt safe. She felt loved. She felt like nothing could ever come between them. When Amanda called, asking if she could stay with them for a while, Jane didn't hesitate. Amanda was her little sister, and Jane loved her deeply. She saw it as an opportunity to bond again, just like they used to when they were younger. She never imagined that opening her home to her own sister would be the beginning of a nightmare. From the moment Amanda stepped into Jane and Tony's luxurious mansion, she couldn't help but admire everything her sister had, especially her handsome, wealthy husband. At first, she tried to push the thoughts aside, reminding herself that Tony was married to Jane, the sister who had always cared for her. But the more she watched them together, the way he treated Jane like a queen, the way he smiled at her with so much love, the more she longed to have that kind of attention for herself. At first, Amanda's attempts were subtle. She started by complimenting Tony every chance she got. "Brother-in-law, you look so good in that suit. Jane is so lucky to have a man like you." She would flash her most charming smile, letting her eyes linger on him just a little longer than necessary. Whenever Tony laughed or responded politely, she felt a small thrill. She found excuses to be around him. If Tony was in the living room watching TV, Amanda would sit beside him, pretending to be interested in whatever he was watching. If he was working on his laptop, she would casually walk by, peeking at his screen and asking unnecessary questions just to start a conversation. "Wow, you're so smart. No wonder Jane adores you." But when simple compliments and small talk didn't get the reaction she wanted, Amanda decided to take things further. She became more playful around him, finding ways to touch him lightly, a hand on his shoulder when laughing at his jokes. Every time she walked past Tony, the scent lingered in the air, making sure he noticed. When he sat down at the dining table, she would casually stand behind him and place her hands on his shoulders, giving him a friendly back rub. "You're so tense, Tony," she would whisper. "I can help with that." The more he resisted, the more determined she became. She knew Tony was a man, and men had weaknesses. If she kept pushing, eventually he would give in. And she was right. One evening, when Jane was out visiting a friend, Amanda walked into the living room wearing an off-shoulder silk dress that barely reached her thighs. She stood in front of Tony, pretending to adjust the strap. "I think my dress is too loose," she murmured, looking at him through half-lidded eyes. Tony swallowed hard and looked away, but she didn't stop. Instead, she sat beside him and leaned in closer. "You don't have to be so serious around me," she whispered. "I know you like looking at me." That was the moment everything changed. From that day on, Tony started noticing her more. He started looking at her longer than he should. He started feeling things he knew he shouldn't feel. And Amanda? She knew she had one. At first, Tony barely paid attention to Amanda's advances. He saw her as his wife's younger sister, nothing more. She was beautiful, yes, but to him, she was just a child compared to Jane. He treated her like family, showing her kindness but keeping a respectful distance. But Amanda was persistent. She started wearing revealing clothes around the house, short silk nightgowns that clung to her curves, tiny crop tops that showed off her smooth skin. She would walk past him slowly, letting her perfume linger in the air. She giggled at his jokes, touched his arm when she spoke, and always found reasons to be close to him. Tony noticed, of course. How could he not? She was young, beautiful, and confident in a way that was hard to ignore. But he loved Jane. He reminded himself of that every time Amanda tried to pull him in with her charms. Whenever she got too close, he found a way to escape. If she sat next to him on the couch, he would stand up, pretending he had something to do. If she leaned in too much while talking, he would step back, creating space. At night, when Jane was asleep, he made sure to stay in their bedroom, avoiding any late-night encounters with Amanda in the hallway. But Amanda was not the type to give up easily. She started making her moves bolder. One evening, while Jane was out visiting a friend, Amanda walked into the living room wearing nothing but a thin satin robe. Tony's heart pounded as she sat beside him, crossing her legs slowly, the robe slipping just enough to reveal her smooth thighs. "You work too hard, Tony," she whispered, placing a soft hand on his shoulder. "You should learn to relax." Tony swallowed hard. His body reacted before his mind could stop it, but he forced himself to look away. "Amanda, this is wrong," he said, standing up quickly. "You're my wife's sister." Amanda only smiled. "So?" she teased. "Does that change how I make you feel?" Tony clenched his fists. He wanted to tell her off, to send her away, but the truth was, she was getting to him. He felt the heat in his chest, the tension in his body. He had been resisting for weeks, but Amanda knew what she was doing. She was young, confident, and dangerously tempting. Still, he loved Jane. He had to be strong. That night, he told himself it was over. He would avoid Amanda at all costs. He would focus on his marriage, his wife, the woman who had been by his side for years. But deep down, he knew something had changed. Amanda had planted a seed of temptation, and no matter how hard he tried to fight it, it was only a matter of time before it took root. Tony had always been a faithful husband. He loved Jane deeply and never imagined himself betraying her, especially not with her own sister. But Amanda was persistent, dangerously persistent. At first, he ignored her subtle advances, the way she leaned a little too close when talking to him, the way she laughed a little too hard at his jokes, the way her hand would linger on his arm longer than necessary. He dismissed it as childish behavior, nothing serious. But Amanda was not a child. She was a 20-year-old woman who knew exactly what she was doing. She started wearing revealing outfits around the house, tight, short dresses that hugged her curves, silky nightwear that barely covered anything. She would walk around barefoot, her hips swaying as if she was on a mission. Sometimes when Jane was away, she would accidentally drop things near Tony, bending down slowly to pick them up, knowing his eyes would follow. But Tony held his ground. He avoided being alone with her. He stayed in his home office longer. He even tried to talk to Jane about Amanda's behavior, but Jane only laughed it off. "She's just young and playful," she said. "Don't take her too seriously." That was his biggest mistake, pretending it wasn't a problem. Because Amanda wasn't just playing. She wanted him, and she wasn't going to stop until she got what she wanted. The turning point came one evening when Jane had to travel for a business meeting. She kissed Tony goodbye and left, trusting her husband completely. Amanda, on the other hand, saw this as her golden opportunity. That night, Tony sat in the living room, watching TV, trying to distract himself. But then Amanda appeared. She was wearing a silk robe, loosely tied, revealing smooth skin underneath. Her long hair was down, framing her face perfectly. She walked over to him, her bare feet making no sound. "Are you lonely?" she asked, sitting beside him. Tony shifted uncomfortably. "Amanda, go to bed," she pouted. "Why do you keep running from me, Tony?" "I know you feel it too." "Feel what?" he asked, his voice tense. She leaned in closer, her perfume filling the air. "This connection between us." Tony turned away, his heart racing. "This is wrong. This is wrong." But then Amanda did something he never expected. She placed her hand on his thigh, her fingers tracing slow circles. Tony stiffened. "Amanda, stop," he said, but his voice was weak. She tilted her head, her eyes locked onto his. "Tell me you don't want me, Tony. Look me in the eyes and tell me." He tried, he really did. But as he stared at her soft lips, at the hunger in her eyes, something inside him snapped. He had been resisting for so long, but in that moment, all logic faded. The temptation that had been building for weeks, the tension, the desire, it all became too much. Amanda saw it in his eyes. She smiled, knowing she had won. "Just once," Tony whispered, as if convincing himself. Amanda leaned in, and the moment their lips touched, there was no turning back. That night, Tony betrayed Jane, and once the line was crossed, there was no stopping what came next. The beginning of the affair. Secrets and risks. At first, Tony tried to ignore Amanda. He knew she was young, beautiful, and full of charm, but he loved his wife, Jane. Amanda, however, was not the type to give up easily. She wanted Tony, and she was willing to do anything to have him. It started with small things. Amanda would brush past Tony in the hallway, her perfume lingering in the air. She would sit too close to him on the couch, pretending it was unintentional. At night, she would walk around in silk nightwear, her curves impossible to ignore. She would smile at Tony in a way that made him uncomfortable, but deep down, he started to feel something he shouldn't. One evening, when Jane was out visiting a friend, Amanda saw her chance. She walked into the living room where Tony was sitting and sat beside him. Her nightdress was barely covering her body, and she looked at him with eyes full of mischief. "Tony, why do you always avoid me?" she asked, her voice soft and teasing. Tony shifted uncomfortably. "Amanda, you're my wife's sister. This is not right." She leaned in closer. "But I see how you look at me. I know you feel something too." Tony took a deep breath and stood up. "This is wrong. I love Jane." Amanda pouted but didn't push further. She knew she had already planted a seed in his mind. Days passed and Amanda continued her games. She would find excuses to be around Tony, laughing at his jokes, touching his arm when she spoke. She acted innocent in front of Jane, but when they were alone, she made sure Tony felt her presence. Then one fateful night, everything changed. Jane had traveled for a family event and was supposed to return the next morning. Tony had spent the evening trying to distract himself, but Amanda made it impossible. She wore a tight red dress and joined him in the living room. "You seem stressed," she said, sitting beside him. "Maybe I can help you relax." Tony sighed. "Amanda, we need to stop this game." She placed a hand on his chest. "Who said it's a game?" Tony tried to resist, but when she pressed her lips against his, he didn't push her away. That night, he made the biggest mistake of his life. From that moment, their secret meetings began. Whenever Jane was out, Amanda would sneak into Tony's room. When Jane was asleep, they would steal moments in the living room, whispering and laughing softly. They thought they were being careful, but the risk was always there. Tony knew he was playing with fire. If Jane ever found out, it would destroy their marriage. Amanda, on the other hand, didn't care about the consequences. She was addicted to the thrill of having her sister's husband. One afternoon, as Tony and Amanda sat close together in the kitchen, lost in their affair, they heard Jane's voice from the hallway. She had returned home early. Panic rushed through Tony. Amanda quickly grabbed a glass of water and stepped away as Jane entered the kitchen. "Oh, you're home early," Tony said, forcing a smile. Jane looked at them, her eyes moving from Tony to Amanda. "Yes, the meeting finished early. What's going on?" "Nothing," Amanda said quickly. "We were just talking." Jane stared at them for a moment, then nodded. "All right, I'm going upstairs." As soon as she left, Tony exhaled sharply. "That was close," he muttered. Amanda smirked. "Relax, she trusts me." But trust was a fragile thing, and soon their secret would come crashing down. The moment Jane caught them. It was a quiet evening in the mansion. Jane had just returned home earlier than expected. She had gone out for a business meeting, but it ended sooner than planned. As she stepped inside, the house felt oddly still. Normally, Tony would be watching TV in the living room, or Amanda would be playing music in her room. But today there was silence. A strange feeling settled in Jane's stomach. Something wasn't right. She placed her handbag on the table and walked down the hallway. As she approached the guest room where Amanda stayed, she noticed the door was slightly open. She didn't think much of it at first, but as she got closer, she heard something. Soft whispers, heavy breathing, and then a giggle. Her heart began to race. Slowly, she pushed the door open. And there, on the bed, she saw them. Tony, her husband, the man she loved with all her heart, was lying in bed with Amanda. Their bodies tangled under the sheets. Amanda's long hair was spread across the pillow, her bare shoulders visible. Tony's arms were wrapped around her, his face buried in her neck. The room smelled of perfume and sweat, a scent that didn't belong to her. Jane froze. Her breath caught in her throat. For a moment, it felt like time had stopped. She blinked, hoping, praying that her eyes were deceiving her, but they weren't. It was real. Her legs felt weak. Her chest tightened, as if she couldn't breathe. She wanted to scream, but no sound came out. Her hands trembled as she clutched the doorframe, struggling to process what she was seeing. Her mind refused to accept it. Amanda turned her head and gasped when she saw Jane standing there. Tony's eyes followed, and the moment he saw his wife, panic flashed across his face. He quickly pulled the sheets over their bodies, his mouth opening as if to say something, but no words came out. Jane finally found her voice, though it was barely a whisper. "Tony, Amanda, what is this?" Her words hung in the air, heavy with shock and betrayal. Amanda sat up, the blanket wrapped around her, but there was no sign of shame on her face. Instead, she looked at Jane calmly, as if she had been expecting this moment. Tony, on the other hand, looked like a man who had just been caught in the middle of a terrible crime. Jane's vision blurred with tears. Her heart pounded so loudly she could hear it in her ears. She wanted to run, to escape the nightmare unfolding before her eyes, but her feet wouldn't move. Tony finally spoke, his voice shaking. "Jane, But Jane didn't let him finish. "Don't you dare say a word," she snapped, her voice sharper than she had ever heard it before. She turned to Amanda, her younger sister, the girl she had protected, cared for, and welcomed into her home. "Amanda, how could you do this to me?" Her voice cracked as a tear slid down her cheek. Amanda didn't look away. Instead, she sighed and shrugged. "I love him, Jane." Her voice was steady, almost defiant. "And I'm not going to apologize for that." Jane felt as if someone had slapped her across the face. Love. Amanda was calling this love. Her hands curled into fists. She wanted to scream, to throw something, to make them feel even a fraction of the pain tearing through her heart. But she didn't. She refused to break down in front of them. With a deep breath, she straightened her shoulders. "Both of you disgust me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Then, without another word, she turned and walked out of the room. As she left, she could hear Tony calling after her. "Jane, wait, please!" But she didn't stop. She couldn't. She made it to her bedroom and locked the door behind her. And then finally she let the sobs take over. She clutched her chest as if holding herself together, because at that moment she felt like she was falling apart. Her marriage, her trust, her family, everything had shattered in an instant. Jane sat at the long glass dining table, her heart pounding as she waited for Tony and Amanda to take their seats. Her fingers trembled as she gripped the edge of the table, struggling to contain the storm brewing inside her. The previous night's events replayed in her mind like a nightmare she couldn't escape. The image of her husband and her own sister tangled together in betrayal. Tony walked in first, his head low, avoiding Jane's eyes. He looked guilty, ashamed, and nervous. Amanda, on the other hand, walked in confidently, her chin raised as if she had nothing to be sorry for. She slid into her seat across from Jane and folded her arms, ready for whatever was coming. The air was thick with tension. The weight of silence pressed down on the room. Jane took a deep breath, her voice shaking as she finally spoke. "I want to hear it from both of you," she said, her eyes darting between Tony and Amanda. "Tell me the truth. What exactly did I see last night?" Tony shifted in his chair, rubbing his palms together nervously. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Amanda, however, had no such hesitation. "You saw exactly what you think you saw," Amanda said, her voice steady and unapologetic. "Tony and I are in love." Jane's breath caught in her throat. Her chest tightened as she stared at her sister in disbelief. "You... what?" Jane whispered, her voice barely audible. "I love Tony," Amanda repeated, her gaze unwavering. "And he loves me too." Jane turned to Tony, waiting for him to deny it, to call Amanda a liar, to say that it was all a terrible mistake. But he said nothing. His silence cut deeper than any words ever could. Jane slammed her fist against the table, making the glasses rattle. Her voice rose, filled with a mix of rage and pain. "She is my sister, Tony. My own blood. How could you?" Tony finally lifted his head, his eyes filled with shame. "Jane, I never planned for this to happen, I swear. But things just got out of control." "Out of control?" Jane let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. "You slept with my sister in my own home, in my own bed, and you call that out of control?" Amanda rolled her eyes, leaning back in her chair. "Stop acting like you own him, Jane. You don't. Tony and I have a connection, something deeper than what you two ever had." Jane felt her body trembling with fury. She could barely recognize the woman sitting in front of her. This was Amanda, the little sister she had protected and cared for, the same sister who was now looking her in the eye and claiming her husband as her own. "You disgust me," Jane spat, her voice sharp as a blade. "I brought you into my home. I treated you like a queen, and this is how you repay me?" Amanda smirked. "You were too blind to see what was happening right in front of you. Maybe if you paid more attention to your husband, he wouldn't have come running to me." Jane's hands clenched into fists. If she hadn't been raised to control her temper, she might have slapped Amanda across the face. Tony looked between the two women, his face pale. "Please, let's not do this. I know I made a mistake, but..." "A mistake?" Jane cut him off. "You didn't trip and fall into her bed, Tony. You made a choice. You betrayed me." Tears burned in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She would not cry in front of them. She would not let them see her break. Taking a deep breath, she straightened her back and steadied her voice. "Amanda, pack your bags. You're leaving this house today." Amanda blinked, surprised. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," Jane said firmly. "You have no place here anymore. I want you out of my house before the sun sets." Amanda scoffed. "And what if I refuse?" Jane leaned forward, her eyes dark with determination. "Then I'll drag you out myself." Tony reached out to touch Jane's hand, but she pulled away as if his touch burned her skin. "Jane, please, let's talk about this." "There's nothing to talk about," Jane snapped. "You both made your choices. Now I'm making mine." For the first time that morning, Amanda looked uncertain. She glanced at Tony, as if expecting him to defend her, but he stayed silent, his head bowed in shame. Jane pushed back her chair and stood up. "This meeting is over. Amanda, I expect you gone in the next hour. And Tony..." She swallowed hard, her voice breaking for the first time. "I don't even know if I can look at you again." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving them both sitting in the silence of their own destruction. What made Jane finally decide to kick Amanda out? Jane had always been a woman of patience, love, and understanding. She believed in family, in loyalty, and most importantly, in the unbreakable bond between sisters. Amanda was her blood, her little sister, whom she had cared for since childhood. When Amanda came to live with them, Jane welcomed her with open arms, never imagining that the same sister she trusted would betray her in the most painful way possible. At first, Jane noticed little things. Amanda's playful touches on Tony's arm, the way she laughed a little too much at his jokes, and how she always seemed to be around whenever he was home. But Jane brushed it off. She's just being friendly, she told herself. After all, Amanda was young and full of life. She had no reason to suspect anything sinister. Then the changes in Tony began. He started coming home late, spending more time in his study and avoiding Jane's touch. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, but whenever she asked, he dismissed her concerns with a tired smile and a quick excuse. Work has been stressful, he would say, and Jane, wanting to believe the best in her husband, let it go. The truth hit her like a thunderbolt the day she walked into one of the guest rooms and found them together. The sight of her beloved husband entangled with her own sister shattered something deep within her. Her body went cold, her mind blank. She couldn't even scream, just stood there, frozen, as the people she loved most betrayed her right before her eyes. The pain was unbearable, but what made it even worse was Amanda's reaction. She wasn't ashamed. She wasn't apologetic. Instead, she looked at Jane with confidence, almost as if she was daring her to say something. And when Jane finally confronted them the next day, Amanda had the audacity to say, "I love Tony, and nothing will ever change that." That was when Jane realized something terrifying. Amanda wasn't just having an affair. She wasn't just being reckless or making a mistake. She had planned this. She had set her sights on Tony from the very beginning, and she was determined to take him away no matter the cost. For the next few days, Jane tried to hold her marriage together. She begged Tony to see reason, to remember the love they shared. She reminded him of their vows, of all the dreams they had built together. But Tony was no longer the man she married. He was distant, ashamed, yet unwilling to let Amanda go. She could see it in his eyes, the hesitation, the guilt, but also the desire. Amanda had him under her spell, and he wasn't fighting it. That was when Jane knew. This isn't just a betrayal. This is war. She couldn't share her home with a sister who had no remorse. She couldn't sleep under the same roof with a husband who was slowly slipping away. Amanda had to leave. So one morning she called for a final meeting. Tony sat quietly, looking like a man weighed down by his own sins. Amanda, as bold as ever, walked in with confidence, her head held high. But Jane had no more words to waste. "Amanda, you are no longer welcome in my home," she said firmly. "Pack your things and leave." For the first time, Amanda's confidence wavered. "Jane!" "Don't call my name," Jane cut her off, her voice steady but filled with pain. "You are my sister, but you have betrayed me in the worst way. You stood before me and claimed to love my husband as if my marriage meant nothing, as if I meant nothing. I will never allow you to continue destroying my home." Amanda turned to Tony, expecting him to say something, to defend her, to fight for her. But Tony lowered his head, silent. He couldn't even look at Jane. The shame was too much. Realizing she had lost, Amanda let out a bitter laugh. "You'll regret this, Jane," she spat before storming off to pack her bags. Jane didn't flinch. She didn't shed a tear. She simply stood there, watching as Amanda left the house that once felt like home. But just as Amanda reached the door, she suddenly doubled over, clutching her stomach. A moment later, she ran to the nearest sink and started vomiting violently. The sight sent a chill through Jane's spine. The thought that flashed through her mind was too horrifying to bear. Is she pregnant? The mansion fell into chaos. Tony rushed to Amanda's side, his face pale. Jane felt her heart pounding in her chest. This couldn't be happening. Not this. Not after everything. They rushed Amanda to the hospital, where they all waited in tense silence. The doctor finally came out, looked at them and said, "She's showing symptoms of malaria. She'll be fine after some treatment." Jane exhaled in relief. If Amanda had been pregnant with Tony's child, it would have been an even deeper wound, one that she wasn't sure she could ever recover from. With that, she paid Amanda's hospital bill, but her decision remained unchanged. The moment Amanda was well enough to leave, Jane sent her back to the village, never to return to her home again. It was the hardest thing she had ever done, but for the sake of her peace, her dignity, and whatever was left of her broken heart, it was the only choice she had. Amanda stood in the middle of the grand living room, her suitcase by her side, her hands trembling slightly. She had never imagined this moment would come so soon. The air in the mansion was thick with tension, and for the first time, Amanda felt truly unwelcome in a place she once called home. Jane stood a few feet away, her arms crossed, her face a mixture of anger and pain. Tony sat on the couch, head in his hands, too ashamed to look up. The silence was deafening. Amanda's heart pounded. She had always been confident, always believed she could get whatever she wanted. But now, as her sister glared at her with so much disappointment, she felt small, like a child caught doing something unforgivable. Still, she refused to let her emotions show. Lifting her chin, she forced a smirk. "So this is it?" she asked, her voice laced with defiance. "You're really throwing me out?" Jane's eyes flashed with fury. "You made your choice, Amanda. You betrayed me. You destroyed my marriage. You have no place here anymore." Amanda let out a bitter laugh. "Destroyed your marriage? You really think this is all my fault? If your husband was so loyal, none of this would have happened." Tony winced at her words but said nothing. Jane took a step closer. "Don't you dare try to justify this. You are my sister, Amanda, my own blood. And yet you had no shame sleeping with my husband under my roof." Her voice shook with emotion. "You have no respect, no conscience. And now you will face the consequences." Amanda's smirk faded. She glanced at Tony, searching his face for something. Guilt, regret, maybe even a hint of the love he had shown her in secret. But all she saw was a broken man, too ashamed to meet her eyes. A sudden wave of panic hit her. Was this really the end? She thought about all the moments she had shared with Tony, the whispered conversations, the stolen kisses, the nights she had spent in his arms. She had convinced herself that what they had was real, that one day he would leave Jane for her. But now, standing here, watching him sink into silence, she realized the truth. She was alone. Her throat tightened, but she refused to cry. She had come too far to break down now. Instead, she picked up her suitcase and turned toward the door. "Fine," she muttered, "I'll leave. But don't think for a second that I regret what I did. I loved him. And maybe, just maybe, he loved me too." Jane's jaw clenched, but she said nothing. Tony finally looked up, his eyes filled with shame. "Amanda," he started, but his voice trailed off. There was nothing left to say. Amanda took one last look around the mansion, the place where her selfish desires had led her to ruin. She had walked in as a guest, full of confidence and charm, and now she was walking out as a disgrace.